morning. A number of years ago when I was in my probably early 20s, we had a youth young adult camp, an annual camp. It was in the southern highlands at this somewhat rustic, I guess, campsite. It was always a lot of fun. There was not a lot of sleep and a lot of raucous activity and lots of food. There's always a guest speaker or some kind of input studies. This year the minister had asked a friend of his to come, and I suspect he probably worded her up a little beforehand to get into the faces of these, shall I say, somewhat entitled, naive, insular, closeted young Christians, to confront them with some of the realities of life and the world and the message of Jesus. She started off a little bit gently, but as the weekend progressed, she became much more provocative and challenging, confronting. She confronted us with social justice, the ways of Jesus and the prophets and even Paul calling for care for the poor and the marginalised, and it being an inclusive community, of looking at the issues of justice, and she highlighted issues of justice all around us. And she threw them at us. Probably the worst thing she did all weekend was she kept quoting the Bible, the Jewish prophets, passage after passage, story after story. She quoted Jesus, what he did, what he said, how he engaged with people, and how he engaged with issues of justice and peace and hope and life for all people. And she quoted Paul in our face. And the effect of this woman, this speaker, over the weekend was interesting. There were those who just, oh yeah, what's this about? And couldn't wait to get on with the raucous activities. It washed over them somewhat, I think. Others, it was in their face, absolutely. For most of us, I guess it was in our face. Hearing stuff that maybe we'd heard in bits and pieces before, but not in any great detail, not really. Being challenged in ways that we'd not been challenged before. To see things in the world from a different perspective. From the perspective of those who struggle, who suffer, who are poor, who are marginalised, who are outcast. And that Jesus and God invites them into this inclusive community. And that another word for justice is love, and how we express love in the world around us. By the end of the weekend, there were those who just, oh yeah. Others, though, who wanted to metaphorically throw her over the cliff and stone her. They were just clashing the whole time. And as many Bible passages she quoted them, they'd throw back others. And they just wrote her off. And I remember one morning tea break, where she confronted us with money and how we actually had more money than we realised. That we belonged to the elite and the exclusive in the world, the top 20% who had 80% of the world's resources, and how we were hoarding it. And those, particularly those who had a bit of money, those more well off, did not like it one bit. And that morning tea break was fuming. There were others of us who were challenged and confronted and came back at her. But I know for myself, there were things in what she said and how she quoted, I guess, Jesus and the prophets. There was a ring of truth. And I couldn't avoid it. I couldn't avoid what she said. I couldn't reject it. And it was difficult and uncomfortable. But it was the beginning of a journey of learning and growing. One that continues today, because I still haven't got it right. When someone speaks this deep truth that confronts our lives and our belief systems and our sense of entitlement, our egos, we want to rise up and reject them, push them away, tell them they're wrong, prove them they're wrong and get rid of them. And that's the story in this week for Jesus. Last week we heard how he was in the synagogue in Nazareth, and he proclaimed good news for the poor, release of captives, recovery of sight to the blind, freedom for the oppressed, and renounce the year of the Lord's favour. And it says it's fulfilled in your presence. And these people in Nazareth are thinking, wow, this is Joe's boy, he's one of us. This message is ours. It's our exclusive message. He's going to do in our midst the really good stuff, and it's going to belong to us. We're part of this. We own it. And Jesus, perhaps sensing this, and certainly in Luke's message, in Luke's telling of the story, wanting to open up this good news, this reign of God, not for an exclusive group, for the whole world, paints a picture where Jesus provokes and challenges them and says, this message isn't for you, because you will just own it and hoard it and keep it for yourselves. God's love and grace is for the whole world. And he challenges and provokes and pushes, and they just want to take him and throw him over a cliff and stone him. Who is this guy? Who does he think he is? And he just walks back through their midst and disappears into the next town. When we hear the messages that confront and challenge, messages of deep compassion, deep justice, that challenge our lives and our ways and our world, sometimes we might be challenged to think, yeah, this is truth, this is good, and be opened up. And sometimes we close down and we want to reject what's happening. The other passage this week is Paul's great passage of love in 1 Corinthians 13, read many places, funerals, weddings, and all over the place. It's because it's such a profound passage. But basically Paul is saying, look, to this church in Corinth, who are looking at exclusive gifts and skills and people who can do certain things. If you can do certain things, you're great, and you flaunt it over others. He says, it doesn't matter what you can do. It doesn't matter how wonderful your rhetoric is, how smooth your words are, how good a speaker you are. If it's not done in deep love, it's like a clanging cymbal. Or one commentator translates it as a rusty gate, fingernails on the chalkboard. It's meaningless. It doesn't matter what you can do or who you are or how great you think you are. If you don't do it in love, it's nothing. And love, in its truest sense, breaks us down, opens up our ego and our defences, makes us vulnerable, and offers us a deeper way. And I think for some of the people in that young youth camp, young adult camp, the woman who spoke out of love. I later discovered that her life had been one where she experienced the margins, where she'd been excluded and abused and pushed to the edges, where she'd experienced some of the marginalisation and injustices of life in the world. She knew what it was like, and she spoke out of that, and she heard Jesus' words and the words of the prophets as inviting her into a deeper life of inclusion and being. And that's what she was challenging us with. For some of us, she opened our eyes. A difficult process, but for others, their minds were closed. I don't know what they went on to think or do in later life, but I hope all of our eyes might have been opened somewhat to hear these words of reign of God, of love and life and hope for all people. And how do you respond when we're confronted by people and situations that challenge our lives, that confront us with who we are and what our culture is doing? And maybe invite us into a different way of life, into a way of deeper love and grace, in the way of Jesus. What will you do with him and his words? Will you throw him over a cliff or follow?
Bye.